A night with a stranger, a billionaire whose name she didn't even know. The chemistry between them was undeniable, but by morning Lila was left alone, the memory of a single night and a fleeting encounter lingering in her mind. But few months later, Lila holds a positive pregnancy test in her hands, and the man she thought she'd never see again is now the father of her child. Lila Donovan didn't make impulsive decisions. She had her life carefully planned, nothing left to chance. She was the woman who made lists, organized every hour of the day, and followed the rules. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, she found herself lying next to a billionaire CEO in a hotel room she never thought she'd end up in. Her heart racing and her mind struggling to comprehend how everything had gone so terribly wrong. Now let me tell you how this incredible moment came to be. Let us know where you are watching from. Comment below. Subscribe to this channel to support our growth. It all began hours earlier at O'Hare Airport, where the storm raged outside, relentlessly tearing at the city. The rumbling thunder echoed through the terminal, and the once crowded boarding gates now stood empty as each flight blinked from delayed to cancelled. The air was thick with frustration as travelers slumped in their seats, some cursing into their phones, others pacing with worry. Lila's flight, too, had been cancelled. Her first chance to get home in months after an exhausting week of meetings. She stood in line at the service desk, clutching her carry-on like it was the last thing keeping her grounded. Her mind raced as she scanned the chaotic scene. Families sprawled across the floor, children crying, businessmen muttering into phones, and no end in sight. She couldn't imagine spending another night stuck at the airport. Not in this chaos. Not after she'd been working tirelessly to get everything right. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry," the airline agent said softly, tapping at her computer.
"We can rebook you for tomorrow afternoon."
Lila's jaw tightened. "Tomorrow? That's 15 hours from now," she replied, disbelief creeping into her voice.
"Yes, ma'am. Every outbound flight is grounded until the system clears."
The agent grimaced, clearly apologetic.
Lila inhaled sharply, her patience slipping away. "Hot vouchers?" she asked, already preparing herself for the answer. "We've distributed the last of them," the agent said, her voice soft with regret. "You might try downtown. Some hotels still have space, but they're filling quickly."
Lila stood frozen for a moment, the reality of another sleepless night settling over her. She had no choice but to leave the airport and try to find a hotel. But as she stepped outside, the downpour soaked through her coat in an instant. The storm was relentless, pelting against the cab windows as the driver muttered curses in Polish. Traffic snarled as she was carried through waterlogged streets. By the time Lila reached the Harbor Grand Hotel, her shoes were soaked, and her damp blouse clung to her body. She must have looked like a mess, but she didn't care anymore. She just wanted a bed. The receptionist, as if sensing her exhaustion, glanced at her forlornly. "Ma'am, we have one shared suite left," she said hesitantly. "It's either that or go back out into the storm." Lila's mind raced. A shared suite? With a stranger? Every instinct screamed no. She wasn't that type of woman. She didn't do reckless, spontaneous decisions. But the thought of returning to the storm, to the chaos of the airport, was enough to break her resolve. "I'll take it," she said sharply, her voice firm despite the confusion swirling in her mind. She had no other choice. The receptionist handed over the key card, and Lila nodded in thanks before trudging down the hallway.
her feet heavy with the weight of the situation. Room 1904. She stopped outside the door, hesitating for a moment. Her keycard trembled in her hand.
Go back to the airport. Find another way to survive this mess. But exhaustion weighed her down like lead. With a sigh, she slipped the key into the lock. The door clicked open. Warm light spilled across the room. The modern suite was sleek and inviting. But it wasn't the room that made her pause. It was the man standing near the minibar, whiskey glass in hand, sleeves pushed up to his elbows. Tall, broad-shouldered. His presence filled the space, drawing her attention before she could even process the details. Dark hair mussed, as if he'd run his hands through it 100 times. A sharp jaw, softened only by the stubble that shadowed it. But it was his eyes, those piercing blue eyes, that drew her in the most. They seemed to glow against the storm outside, as if they held secrets she had no business knowing. He turned slowly, his gaze locking with hers. The moment was electric, charged with something neither of them could deny. They told you. His voice was low, steady, almost too calm, that I'd be sleeping next to a woman I've never met. Lila's heart skipped a beat. She swallowed, trying to shake the sudden heat that flushed her cheeks. Yeah, real charming, she replied, her words sharper than she intended. His lips twitched, but it wasn't a smile, not yet. It was something else, a flicker of something. You can take the bed. I'll take the couch. Lila hesitated, still caught between suspicion and a reluctant sense of gratitude. We'll split it, she said, her voice firm as she took off her wet jacket. I'm not a damsel. His brow lifted slightly, acknowledging her strength. Noted. The storm howled outside as Lila slipped into the bathroom, her mind still racing. When she emerged in a hotel robe, her damp curls piled high in a knot, he was already stretched across the far side of the bed, scrolling through his phone. The quiet authority in the way he reclined, the ease with which he occupied the space, made her feel suddenly small, almost out of place. She climbed into bed on the other side, pulling the blanket up to her chin, trying not to notice the way his shirt clung to his lean muscles. For a long while, the room was quiet, comfortably so. But it was the kind of silence that held secrets, the kind of silence that felt like something unspoken was waiting to happen. Then, softly, he spoke. Storms keep you up too. Lila stared at the ceiling, not wanting to admit how unsettled she felt by the proximity of a stranger. They remind me I don't control anything. She felt his gaze shift toward her, shadowed but intent. That's honest. And you? She asked, her voice low, curious. What about you? His voice was soft, raw, vulnerable in a way she hadn't expected. I sleep better when someone else is breathing in the room. It wasn't flirtation. It was something more vulnerable, more open, than either of them had expected. She swallowed hard, the tightness in her chest growing. What's your name? He hesitated for a moment, as if deciding how much to give. Damien, he said, his voice heavy with meaning, as though it were a promise neither of them was ready to make. The name settled between them like an unspoken vow. For a moment, neither moved, neither spoke. Then Lila shifted, brushing her hand against his as she settled under the blanket. A slight touch, a pause, and something simmered between them, a spark neither could ignore. Damien's eyes met hers, the weight of their shared solitude hanging in the air. "You don't seem like the kind of woman who shares hotel rooms with strangers," he murmured, his voice low, thoughtful. Lila's laugh was soft but bitter. "I'm not. But tonight isn't exactly a choice, is it?" "Sometimes," she added, her gaze locking with his, "the things we don't plan for show us who we really are." Damien's eyes softened, as if he saw something in her that she hadn't realized herself. And just like that, everything. The storm outside had nothing on the whirlwind that had begun to spin inside the four walls of this shared hotel room. Lila lay in bed, the room spinning as she stared at the ceiling. The rain continued to lash against the windows, the sound of it drumming in her ears. She had never felt more exposed, more vulnerable. She wasn't used to being out of control. And yet, here she was, lying next to a man she had just met, a man whose very presence seemed to challenge everything she thought she knew about herself. He had a power about him, an energy that made her feel small, almost invisible in comparison. Damien Steele wasn't just any man. He was the billionaire CEO of Steele Industries, a name synonymous with success, power, and control. The kind of man who never had to second-guess his decisions. The kind of man who probably didn't care about people like her. But for some reason, as she lay in the bed beside him, she couldn't help but feel connected to him. The chemistry between them was undeniable. But it was more than that. There was something deeper, something raw and unspoken that lingered in the air. It wasn't the kind of attraction she had ever experienced. It was complicated. Lila let out a long sigh, staring at the hotel room's low-lit ceiling. She had never been the kind of woman to second-guess her decisions. She had built her life on plans, on control. But now, her world felt like it had been thrown off course. She wasn't ready to be a mother. She wasn't ready for any of this. The pregnancy, Damien's child, was a bombshell that had detonated in her life without warning. And now she had to figure out how to pick up the pieces. The next few days passed in a blur of uncertainty. Lila tried to push everything to the back of her mind. She threw herself into work, as she always did when things got overwhelming. But it was impossible to escape the reality of the situation. She couldn't stop thinking about the tiny, growing life inside her. She didn't know how to feel about it. Part of her was terrified, unsure of how she would handle it alone. The other part, however, couldn't help but wonder if she was capable of more than she realized. But no matter what she told herself, the idea of raising a child alone was daunting. She didn't have the support system most people did. Her parents lived far away, and she had always kept her relationships at arm's length. She had chosen independence, and now it was staring her in the face. Damien. The thought of him kept nagging at her. She had to face the fact that she would have to tell him sooner or later. He was the father, after all. And while she hadn't expected anything from him, something told her that she couldn't just ignore him. Lila hesitated. Should she reach out? Would he care? For a man like him, who seemed to live in a world of power and wealth, would her pregnancy even matter? Or would it be nothing more than an inconvenience? Just another complication in his already complicated life. Her phone sat on the table, the screen staring back at her. The number was still there. Damien Steele's number. She could text him, call him. But something held her back. She had no idea what she would say, what kind of response she would get. Taking a deep breath, she picked up her phone. Damien had just finished another long day in the office when his phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced at the screen, his brow furrowing as he saw the unfamiliar number. Lila Donovan. He had been thinking about her ever since that night in Chicago. He couldn't explain why. She wasn't his type, not really. She wasn't a part of his world. And yet, there was something about her that had stayed with him. He had tried to brush it off, but he couldn't. He stared at the screen for a moment longer, then swiped it to unlock. He couldn't help it. He had to know what she wanted. He tapped out a quick reply. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. She was typing. His pulse quickened as he waited. He wasn't sure what he expected, but he certainly didn't expect what he saw next. Lila's hands trembled as she typed her message. This was it. The moment of truth. There was no turning back. I need to talk to you. Can we meet? It was simple, straightforward. But for her, it was everything. She had no idea how Damien would react. But she had to try. She had to know where they stood. A few seconds passed before his response came through. I'm surprised to hear from you, but sure, we can meet. When and where? Lila stared at the message. It felt surreal, almost. The man who had been a stranger to her just days ago was now willing to meet. Maybe this wasn't so bad after all. She quickly replied, Tomorrow. I'll be in the city so we can meet wherever you're comfortable. The next day, Lila found herself pacing in the lobby of a high-end restaurant. She had suggested it, figuring it was neutral ground, a place where they could talk in private. But now, as the minutes ticked by, she couldn't shake the nervous energy that coursed through her veins. What would Damien say? How would he react? A few minutes later, she saw him. Damien. He walked into the restaurant with the same calm demeanor that he always had. He looked like he belonged in a place like this. His sharp suit and confident stride drew attention. But he didn't seem to care. His eyes immediately landed on her. And for a moment, neither of them moved. She could tell he was just as uneasy as she was. Hi, he said, his voice low as he reached the table. Hi, she replied, her heart racing. The moment was awkward, charged with tension. Neither of them seemed to know what to say at first. Finally, Damien broke the silence. You said we needed to talk. He didn't seem shocked, but he wasn't exactly thrilled either. He sat back, steepling his fingers in front of him, as if considering his next move. Okay, he said slowly.
What do you want from me, Lila?
The question hit her like a punch to the gut. What did she want from him? She had no idea. "I don't know," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm not ready for this, and I don't know if I can do it on my own. But I don't know what to expect from you either." Damien's eyes softened, but there was a hesitation in them that Lila couldn't ignore.
"I'm not sure I'm ready either," he said quietly. "But I'll be here, for you and the baby. I can't promise everything will be perfect, but I won't leave you to handle this alone."
Lila didn't know what to make of his words. They were sincere, but there was something about the way he said them that made her wonder if he truly understood what it meant to be a father. For a moment, they just sat there, the weight of the situation pressing in around them. Finally, Lila spoke. "I don't need anything from you except your honesty. If you're in, then you're in. But if you're not, then we'll figure something out. But I won't be strung along." Damien nodded, his jaw tightening.
"I'm in,"
He said, his voice firm.
"But I won't pretend this will be easy. You deserve more than that."
Lila took a deep breath, feeling the tension ease slightly in her chest. She didn't know what the future held, but at least for now, she wasn't alone. As they parted ways, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. There was still uncertainty, still doubt hanging in the air, but there was also something else, something that, for better or worse, felt like the beginning of a new chapter. But as she walked away, she couldn't ignore the nagging question in the back of her mind. Was he truly ready for this? Or was he just saying? The sound of a sharp knock echoed through the expansive foyer of the Steele mansion. It was a sound that for Damien had always signaled one thing: his father's presence. Victor Steele was a man who commanded attention, a businessman whose influence stretched far beyond the boundaries of steel industries. At 62, he was as sharp as ever, his mind a calculating machine that prioritized power and control above all else. For him, family had always been secondary to the empire he had spent decades building. As Damien heard the firm footsteps approaching, he knew that today was no different. The door to Damien's study opened, and Victor Steele walked in without waiting for an invitation. He was impeccably dressed in a dark suit, his silver hair neatly combed back. There was an air of command that surrounded him, as if the very walls of the mansion had been built to serve his every whim. "Damien," Victor's voice was deep, smooth, and authoritative. "We need to talk." Damien sat behind his desk, his fingers absently tapping the edge of his laptop. He had known this conversation was coming. The pregnancy, the news of Lila. It was a disruption to the life his father had meticulously crafted for him. He could already see the look on Victor's face, the disappointment that Damien had come to dread over the years. Victor took a seat across from him without waiting for an invitation. His eyes, cold and calculating, fixed on Damien. "I assume you've heard the news," Victor said, his tone clipped. There was no warmth, no attempt at understanding, only business. Damien nodded. "I've heard. I hope you're not planning to entertain this situation any longer than necessary." Victor leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You have a responsibility to this family, to the empire. A child with a woman like Lila Donovan will only cause unnecessary complications. Damien's jaw tightened. He knew this was coming. His father had never been one to mince words, especially when it came to matters of family legacy. But hearing it now, so bluntly, made his stomach turn. "You're asking me to abandon my child," Damien said, his voice low but firm. Victor's eyes flashed with impatience. "I'm asking you to think about the bigger picture. You're the heir to Steel Industries, Damien. The future of this family rests on your shoulders. Lila Donovan is inconsequential. This baby is nothing but a distraction." Damien's heart clenched at his father's words, but he forced himself to keep his composure. He had spent years in this man's shadow, following the path his father had laid out for him. That something was different now. He could feel it deep inside. Something had shifted when he learned about the baby. And no matter how hard he tried to ignore it, that feeling was growing stronger every day. "I'm not going to walk away from this, Father," Damien said, his voice steadier than he felt. "This is my child, and I'm going to be a father." Victor's face hardened. "You don't understand the stakes, Damien. This isn't just about you or some woman you barely know. This is about the Steel legacy. If you allow your personal life to interfere with the business, it will be the end of everything we've built." Damien stood up, his hands gripping the edge of the desk. His father's words were like knives, each one aimed at the heart of his convictions. But for the first time in his life, Damien didn't flinch. He didn't back down. "I'm not abandoning my family," Damien said, his voice cutting through the tension. "I'm not going to let you dictate what's best for me. This child is mine, and I'm going to do what's right." Victor stood up, towering over his son, his expression a mix of disbelief and anger. "You think you can defy me?" he spat. "You think you can have both, a child and the empire? You're fooling yourself, Damien. If you want to keep this business, you'll make a choice. Your child or your inheritance." Damien's mind raced as he left his father's study. The pressure, the weight of his family's expectations felt like 1,000 pounds pressing down on him. He couldn't deny that a part of him had always craved his father's approval. For years, he had followed Victor's commands, knowing that the legacy of Steel Industries was his ultimate responsibility. But now, with Lila and the baby in his life, everything had changed. He had never imagined that a single decision, a single mistake, could alter the course of his future so drastically. But now that the truth was out, he couldn't pretend that he didn't care. He couldn't pretend that the baby didn't matter. Later that evening, Damien found himself standing in front of Lila's apartment building. He had asked her to meet him. He had to talk to her, to figure out what was going on inside his own mind. He couldn't shake the image of his father's angry face, the pressure that had been placed on him to choose between his family and his future. Damien had spent his entire life building walls around his emotions, around the parts of himself he didn't want anyone to see. But now, with the reality of fatherhood looming over him, those walls were starting to crack. He couldn't shut out the truth anymore. And Lila, she was a part of that truth now. As he walked through the door of her apartment, Damien could feel the tension in the air.
He had never been good at talking about his feelings, never been good at admitting when he didn't have all the answers. But standing here now, with Lila watching him, he realized that for the first time in his life, he didn't want to hide behind his empire or his father's legacy. He wanted to be a father, and that terrified him. Lila stood by the window, her arms crossed as she looked out at the city below. Her back was to him, but Damien could feel the distance between them. She was always so composed, so sure of herself. But now, with everything happening, he could see the cracks in her armor. "I talked to my father," Damien said, his voice rough. Lila turned slowly, her eyes searching his face. "And?" Damien sighed, running a hand through his hair. "He wants me to walk away from this. From you, from the baby. He says I can't have both, that I'll have to choose between you and the legacy of steel industries." Lila's heart skipped a beat. She had always known that Damien's family would be a complication, but she hadn't anticipated it would come to this. She had hoped that Damien would stand by her, that he would put her and their child above everything else. But hearing this now, seeing the struggle in his eyes, made her question everything. "What are you going to do?" Lila asked softly. Damien took a deep breath, his eyes locking with hers. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I do know this. I'm not going to walk away from you. I'm not going to walk away from my child. I don't care what my father says." Lila felt a weight lift from her shoulders, though the uncertainty still lingered in the air. "You mean that?" Damien nodded. "I do. But I can't do this alone, Lila. I need you to be part of this. I can't promise it will be easy, but I'll stand by you. By both of you." Lila looked at him, her heart still uncertain, but also full of hope. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time she believed that Damien was ready to face it with her. "I'll be here, Damien," she said, her voice steady. "But you have to make it clear to your family. They can't come between us." Damien nodded, his resolve hardening. "I will, I promise. I'm not going to let them tear us apart." As Damien left Lila's apartment, he felt a sense of clarity he hadn't experienced in a long time. The battle with his father was far from over, but something inside him had shifted. He was no longer just the heir to steel industries. He was a father, and he would fight for his family, whatever it took. Damien Steele was done being torn between his family's expectations and his own future. He had made his choice, and now he was ready to stand by Lila's side. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Lila sat on the edge of her couch, her hands trembling as she read the text message again. It was from Damien. His mother, Maya Steele, had requested a paternity test. Lila had always expected that Damien's family might doubt her, but she hadn't anticipated this, a cold, calculated request for a test that made her feel like a stranger in their world. It wasn't just the fact that Maya had demanded the test, that the way she'd done it, through Damien, as if it were a simple formality. The lack of consideration for her feelings, the assumption that she might have been lying about something as significant as the father of her child, cut deeper than Lila had expected. Her stomach churned as she stared at the screen. The message from Damien was short, almost apologetic. "Maya insists on a paternity test to confirm the father. I'm sorry, Lila. I understand how this must feel, but I'm asking you to do this for my family. I'll be there for you every step of the way. Damien." For a moment, Lila was speechless. She had known from the beginning that Damien's family would be a complication, but this, it felt like a betrayal. She had been vulnerable with him, trusted him with the truth of her pregnancy, and now it seemed that trust was being questioned, not just by him but by his family. She leaned back against the couch, taking a deep breath to steady herself. The emotional weight of it all was overwhelming. Damien had always been a man who valued control, but in this moment, he found himself completely out of his depth. The request for the test had come from Maya Steele, his mother, who was relentless in her desire to ensure that their family's legacy was protected at all costs. As the heir to Steele Industries,
Damien had lived his entire life with the weight of that responsibility. His mother had never hesitated to make decisions for him, and this was no different. But it didn't sit well with him. The moment he received Maya's demand, he had felt the familiar sting of frustration. Lila deserved more than this. She deserved trust, and the simple fact that his mother had openly questioned her, that they had openly questioned him, made his blood boil. But he also knew that his mother's influence was formidable, and the pressure to conform was immense. And yet, despite it all, Damien couldn't shake the thought that this test, this intrusion into their private lives, would only add more fuel to the fire that had already begun to burn between him and Lila. Lila was having lunch at a cafe, trying to keep herself busy and distracted from the storm brewing inside her. She had agreed to the test, reluctantly, because she had no choice. But as she sat there, staring at her untouched food, she realized that agreeing had been the easy part. What really bothered her was the emotional toll it was taking. The past few days had been filled with tension. Damien's constant apologies, the awkward silences between them as they navigated the complexities of their situation. She couldn't help but wonder if, deep down, Damien felt the same way she did. Was he doing this because he was forced to? Because it was his duty? Or was he genuinely interested in being a father to this child? Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was Damien again. The results are in. I'll be over in an hour to talk. Her heart raced. It was happening. The truth. Finally. When Damien arrived an hour later, Lila could see the strain in his face. He wasn't wearing his usual confident demeanor, the mask of the successful businessman. He looked vulnerable, almost nervous. For a man who controlled so much, who had built an empire from the ground up, this situation had brought him to his knees in a way nothing else had. Lila stood up when he entered, her arms crossed in front of her as if guarding herself from the pain she felt. He looked at her for a moment, his eyes full of regret, before taking a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Lila. I never wanted this to feel like an interrogation." Damien's voice was low, pained. He stepped closer but stopped himself, unsure of how she would respond. Lila didn't know what to say. She had wanted to be strong, to stand tall and unaffected, but the reality of it all, the test, the judgment from his family, made her feel small, insignificant. "I didn't ask for this, Damien," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "I didn't ask for your family to question me, to question us. It's humiliating." Damien took a step forward, his expression apologetic.
I know, and I'm sorry. But it wasn't just about you. My mother, she's been controlling every decision for years, and I couldn't stop this from happening. But I want you to know, Lila, that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Lila's heart skipped a beat. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that he was being sincere, that he wasn't just saying what she needed to hear. But after everything that had happened, after the test, she wasn't sure. She had seen how easily his family's influence could pull him away from her. What if this was all just a fleeting moment of responsibility, a token gesture that he would forget once the baby was born? Damien hesitated, his gaze shifting toward the table where the paternity results sat, sealed in an envelope. He reached for it, tearing it open with one swift motion, and pulled out the paper inside. The words were clear, and the truth hit him like a ton of bricks. Damien Steele is the biological father of Maya Steele's child. He exhaled sharply, looking at the paper for a moment longer before glancing up at Lila. His voice was low, almost a whisper. I'm the father, Lila.
I'm really the father. Lila blinked, her mind spinning. A part of her felt relieved, as if the weight of the uncertainty had finally been lifted. But another part of her, the part that had grown numb from all the emotional upheaval, felt angry. Angry that this had to be so complicated. Angry that her truth had been questioned. Angry that Damien's family had forced this test on her, making her feel like she was somehow unworthy of their trust. I know, Lila said, her voice steady. I saw the results. But it doesn't change everything else, Damien. It doesn't change how your family views me, or how they'll treat us moving forward. It doesn't change how you're really feeling about all of this. Damien ran a hand through his hair, his eyes full of conflict. I'm sorry. I know this is difficult. I never meant for this to be so painful for you. But Lila, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I've never felt anything like this before. I'm trying. I want to be there for you. For the baby. Lila took a deep breath, trying to push back the tears that threatened to surface. She wanted to believe him, wanted to feel that sense of relief that should have come with the confirmation of the truth. But instead, she felt a cold emptiness inside. A part of her still doubted Damien's sincerity. Was he just doing this because it was the right thing to do? Was he really ready to step into the role of a father? Or was this all just an obligation? Damien noticed the distance in her eyes, the walls that she had put up. He stepped forward again, his voice earnest. Lila, I know I'm not perfect, and I know I've messed up. But I promise you, I'm trying. I'm trying to be the father you and the baby need. I'll do whatever it takes to prove that to you. Lila's heart ached as she looked at him. She wanted to believe him. She really did. But she had been hurt before, and she wasn't sure if she could risk her heart again. I hope so, Damien, she said quietly. But right now, I don't know what to believe. As Damien left her apartment that evening, he felt the heavy weight of uncertainty settle over him. He had promised Lila that he would stand by her, but he knew that his family's judgment and his own doubts were far from over. He wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear. The journey he had embarked on wasn't going to be easy. And for the first time in his life, Damien Steele wasn't sure if he was ready for the challenge. The phone buzzed in Lila's hand, pulling her out of the haze of her thoughts. She had been sitting in her apartment for hours, replaying every conversation she'd had with Damien, every word, every touch. Her mind had been on nothing but him and their baby. But now, as she glanced down at her screen, everything seemed to come crashing down. Breaking news. Billionaire CEO Damien Steele's mystery woman revealed. Pregnancy sparks gold digger allegations. Lila's heart stopped for a moment as she clicked the headline, her eyes scanning the article that followed. The words on the screen blurred as her pulse quickened. The leak had come from nowhere. There was no warning, no heads up. The article claimed that Lila, a woman of unknown background, had manipulated Damien into a one-night affair, only to become pregnant and lock him into an impossible situation. It was littered with accusations that Lila was after Damien's money, that she was a gold digger trying to secure a fortune by using his child as leverage. The words stung. But it wasn't the article that hurt the most. It was the fact that Victor Steele, Damien's own father, had orchestrated this smear campaign. The press had received an anonymous tip. An anonymous tip that painted Lila in the worst possible light, turning her from a woman in a complicated, vulnerable situation into a manipulative, greedy outsider. Lila dropped her phone on the table, her hands shaking as the words continued to echo in her mind. Gold digger. Manipulative. Opportunistic. She felt sick, betrayed. The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in on her as the weight of what had just happened settled over her. How could Damien's family do this? She had tried so hard to make this work. She had opened her heart to him, trusted him with her truth, only to have it torn apart by his family's relentless thirst for control. Damien had promised to stand by her, to be there for her. And now this. Now, the very family he had always put above everything else was turning her into a villain. Damien sat at his desk, his phone buzzing non-stop. The notifications flooded in one after another, and he could feel the weight of the world pressing down on him. The leak had hit the press hard. The tabloids were calling it a scandal of epic proportions. Damien Steele, the heir to one of the world's wealthiest families, had been duped by a woman who was now using his child to claim a portion of his fortune. Victor Steele had won, his plan unfolding exactly as he had hoped. The public perception was already beginning to shift, and Lila was being painted as nothing more than a gold digger. Damien's jaw clenched as he scrolled through the endless articles, seeing how quickly the media had turned on Lila. His mind raced with thoughts of what had been said, what his father had orchestrated. The betrayal hit him hard. But worse was the realization that Lila was being dragged through the mud because of a family she had no part in. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Lila. "I never wanted this, Damien. I didn't ask for any of this. I thought you'd stand by me. But now I see it was all a game to your family." Damien closed his eyes, his heart sinking. He had promised her. He had promised to protect her. But now, with the world turning against her, he wasn't sure how he could do that. He couldn't shield her from the media storm, couldn't undo what his family had done. The guilt gnawed at him as he realized just how much control they still had over him, and over his relationship with Lila. Lila was sitting on the couch when Damien finally called. The phone rang for what felt like forever before she answered, her throat tight as she braced herself for the conversation she didn't want to have. "Damien," she said, her voice flat. "What is this? What's going on?" "Lila, listen to me. I didn't—" he started, but she cut him off before he could finish. "No, Damien. I don't want to hear it. Your family, they've ruined everything. They've turned me into a villain for simply existing in your world. Do you realize what's happening? I'm being crucified in the media, and it's your family behind it. Why didn't you stop them? Why didn't you protect me?" Damien's heart broke as he listened to the raw emotion in her voice. The pain and confusion in her words were like a dagger to his chest. He had promised to protect her, and now he couldn't even keep her safe from his own family's cruelty. "I didn't know," Damien said, his voice thick with frustration. "I didn't know this was coming. I didn't know my father would pull something like this. Lila, you have to believe me. I never wanted this for you. I never wanted you to be dragged into the public eye like this." Lila let out a bitter laugh, but it was devoid of humour. "Believe you? How can I believe you, Damien, when your family has already made up their minds about me? I'm nothing but a gold digger to them. And now, everyone thinks the same thing. What do you expect me to do? I'm stuck in this mess, and I don't know if I can get out of it." Damien ran a hand through his hair, feeling completely helpless. "I'm not going to let them destroy you, Lila. I'm going to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." Lila swallowed hard.
"They've already decided what my intentions are. And you?" She paused, her voice shaking. "You haven't even told them the truth about us. You haven't stood up for me. You haven't defended me." Damien felt a knot form in his stomach. She was right. He hadn't stood up for her, not in the way he should have. He had been too passive, too willing to let his family dictate his actions. And now, Lila was paying the price. "I will, Lila," he said, his voice firm. "I'll stand up to my family. I'm going to make sure the truth comes out, and I'm going to defend you, no matter what. You're not alone in this." The next morning, Damien stood in front of a packed press conference, his hand clutching the podium. The room was buzzing with reporters, the air thick with anticipation. The public had been waiting for his response, for him to finally address the scandal that had erupted over the past few days. Damien took a deep breath before speaking, his voice steady but forceful. "I want to make it clear to everyone here today that the accusations being made about Lila Donovan are false. The notion that she is in any way trying to manipulate me or gain access to my wealth is not only inaccurate, it's completely unfounded. Lila is a woman who is trying to navigate an incredibly difficult situation, and I stand by her. I will not let her be treated like this by anyone, not even my own family."
The room fell silent as Damien paused, the weight of his words hanging in the air. I know my family has tried to manipulate this situation to their own advantage, he continued, his gaze sweeping across the room. But I will not allow anyone, not even my father, to come between me and what is right. Lila and I are in this together, and we will face whatever comes next, as a family. Damien's heart pounded in his chest as the reporters began to ask questions, but he didn't flinch. He had made his statement, and now there was no turn.
Lila watched the press conference from the comfort of her apartment, her phone pressed to her ear as Damien's voice came through the line. "Did you hear it?" he asked. "Did you hear what I said?" Lila's heart swelled with emotion, the bitterness that had settled in her chest slowly beginning to fade. Damien had done it. He had stood up for her, for them. "I heard it," she said softly. "Thank you." Damien's voice softened.
Lila, I love you, and I love our baby. I'm not going anywhere. No matter what happens with my family, I'm here for you.
Lila closed her eyes, the weight of everything slowly lifting off her shoulders. For the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could make it through this. Together. As the days passed, the public backlash began to shift. Damien's words had struck a chord, and the media began to turn its attention away from Lila and focus on the real story. The control his family had over him, and the lengths they were willing to go to preserve their legacy. Lila and Damien's relationship was still fragile, but for the first time it felt like they were finally on the same side. And as the storm raged on outside, Lila began to let down her guard, allowing herself to believe in the possibility of a future with Damien. The external pressures were far from over. But in that moment, Lila knew one thing for sure. Damien wasn't going anywhere. The shrill sound of Maya's fevered cries pierced through the calm of Lila's apartment, echoing in her mind like an alarm she couldn't escape. For the past several hours, Lila had tried everything: cold compresses, medicine, soothing words. Nothing seemed to ease her daughter's distress. The little girl's small body trembled uncontrollably, her forehead burning with fever. Lila felt helpless, her heart tightening in her chest with every labored breath Maya took. "Maya, sweetheart, please. Just a little more water. Mommy's here," Lila whispered desperately, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. She had never seen Maya like this, her usual vibrant energy replaced by a weakness that had taken hold of her so quickly. Maya let out a soft, painful whimper, her eyes glassy and unfocused. Lila's mind raced. She couldn't wait any longer. Something was wrong. Something more than just a simple fever. Without wasting another second, Lila scooped her daughter into her arms, her heart pounding with fear as she rushed out of the apartment. The hospital was just a few blocks away, but every second felt like a lifetime as she navigated through the crowd, her daughter's tiny body pressed close to hers. Damien had just finished an early morning meeting when his phone buzzed. The text was brief, but sent a jolt of panic straight through him. "Damien, Maya is very sick. I'm taking her to the hospital." Lila's words hit him harder than he could have expected. His heart stopped for a moment, his thoughts immediately flooding with worry for his daughter. Maya. His child. Their child. Without hesitation, Damien rushed out of the office, heading straight for the hospital. His mind raced with thoughts of Lila, how she must be feeling, how scared she must be. The distance between them had been growing in recent days, their relationship tested by external forces. But this was something he had no control over. The drive felt like an eternity. The flashing lights of the hospital's emergency room sign were the first thing he saw when he arrived, and he rushed inside without even checking in at the front desk. He found Lila in the waiting room, pacing back and forth. Her face was pale. Her eyes filled with tears she was desperately trying to hold back. When she saw him, her expression softened slightly. But the fear was still there, lingering like a cloud over her head. "Damien," she breathed, as if the sight of him had grounded her. She looked exhausted, her hair disheveled, her hands shaking. "They're still running tests."
"I don't know what's happening. She was fine last night, and then this morning, it all changed so fast. The fever, she couldn't breathe properly, Damien. I don't know what's wrong."
Damien's heart ached seeing her like this. His protective instincts flared, and for the first time in weeks his walls, the ones he had built up so carefully around his emotions, began to crack. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Lila, pulling her to him gently. She didn't hesitate, resting her head against his chest as her body shook with the weight of her fear. "I'm here, Lila. I'm here," he murmured softly, his hand rubbing her back. "We'll get through this together." Lila's voice was barely a whisper when she spoke, still trembling. "I can't lose her, Damien. She's everything to me. I don't know what I'd do if something happened to her. I can't." Damien held her tighter, feeling the rawness of her pain and fear. He wasn't sure how to make her feel better, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going anywhere. He wasn't going to let her go through this alone. Hours passed, and the sterile smell of the hospital only heightened the growing anxiety in Lila's chest. She had never felt so small, so vulnerable, as she did now. The thought of her daughter, fragile and sick in a hospital bed, tore her apart. She hadn't realized how deeply she had come to rely on Damien's presence, his calm, steady support. As she sat beside Maya's bed, the beeping machines and flickering lights only reminded her of how powerless she felt in the face of such a vast, unfeeling system. Damien had never left her side. When the doctor finally walked in, Lila had been half dazed with exhaustion, her eyes glued to Maya's feverish face. But when Damien spoke, his voice steady and full of resolve, it cut through the haze. "We need answers," Damien said, his tone not demanding, but firm. "What's going on with her?" The doctor, a middle-aged man with glasses perched on the edge of his nose, looked at them both with a weary expression. He had been dealing with an overwhelming number of cases today, but this one was different. It was personal. He could see the genuine fear in both Lila's and Damien's eyes. "We're still running tests, but it looks like she has a severe viral infection. Her fever is very high, and her respiratory system is under strain. We're starting her on antibiotics and fluids, and we'll monitor her closely. But we'll need to keep her here overnight at least, maybe longer depending on how she responds." Lila closed her eyes, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't a definitive answer, but it was better than nothing. At least Maya had a fighting chance. Damien stepped closer to the bed, placing a hand gently on Lila's shoulder. "She's strong, Lila. She'll fight this. I know she will." Lila nodded, that the weight of the uncertainty still pressed on her chest. She didn't want to be alone in this. She couldn't bear the thought of facing it without Damien by her side. The night passed in a blur of hospital rooms, machines, and whispered conversations with the doctors. Damien remained by Lila's side, his presence a constant source of comfort. He held her hand as they waited for news, and when it came, it was a small victory. Maya's fever began to break, and her breathing slowly stabilized. She wasn't out of the woods yet, that the worst had passed. As the night wore on, Lila finally found herself drifting off to sleep in the small chair beside Maya's bed, exhausted but relieved. Damien had not left her side. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Lila," he said softly, his voice breaking through the quiet. "You don't have to go through this alone. I'm not leaving you. I'll be here, no matter what." Lila opened her eyes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she saw him clearly. Not as the CEO of a powerful company, not as the son of his manipulative father, but as a man who cared deeply for her.
Who was willing to fight for their family. She could see the rawness in his eyes, the vulnerability that had cracked through the walls he had built so high. She reached out, her fingers brushing his hand. "I know, Damien," she said quietly. "I know." As the morning light began to filter into the hospital room, Lila saw a change in Damien. He was no longer just the man she had first met, a distant, focused businessman. He was a partner, a father, someone who had stepped up when the world had started to crumble around her. Maya's condition had stabilized by the time they were able to bring her home from the hospital. Though the stress of the past 24 hours still lingered in the back of Lila's mind, there was a newfound sense of trust in her heart. Trust that Damien wasn't just here because of obligation or guilt. He was here because he cared. Their bond had deepened in those long, anxious hours. And though there would still be challenges ahead, challenges they would have to face together, Lila felt for the first time in a long time a sense of hope. As they walked out of the hospital together, Damien by her side, Lila couldn't help but smile at the small but significant changes she had seen in him. This man, who had once been all business and emotional distance, had shown her a side of him she had never expected. He was no longer just a billionaire CEO. He was the father of her child. And that made all the difference. "We're in this together, Lila," Damien said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time, Lila truly believed him. As they stepped into the car, the sun rising over the horizon, Lila knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. One where trust, support, and love would guide them through whatever lay ahead. Maya's recovery was the first step, and together they would navigate the rest. The courtroom was cold, the air thick with tension. Lila sat rigidly in her hands clasped tightly in her lap as her eyes flickered between the lawyers, the judge, and Damien, who sat a few feet away from her. The room felt more like a battleground than a place of justice. Lila had always prided herself on her independence. She had built her life from the ground up, never relying on anyone else,
never allowing herself to be anyone's pawn. But now, sitting in this courtroom, her daughter's future on the line, she was beginning to feel that same powerlessness she had fought so hard to avoid. This wasn't just about Maya's health anymore. This was about her being able to keep her daughter in her life without being controlled by the Steele family and their demands. Damien, on the other hand, was facing a different kind of battle. It wasn't just his love for Lila and Maya at stake. It was his loyalty to his family, to the empire his father had built, and the pressure that had been mounting from his father for weeks. Victor Steele's influence was powerful, and he had made it clear from the beginning that he would do anything to protect the family legacy, even if that meant tearing apart Damien's personal life. The courtroom was filled with murmurs as the proceedings continued. The Steele family's legal team had already made their case, painting Lila as unfit to raise Maya. They accused her of being unable to provide the wealth and stability that Damien could offer, presenting a narrative of Lila as a single mother struggling to make ends meet, painting her as someone who had no business raising a child in the upper echelons of society. Lila's lawyer, a calm, collected woman named Janet, had been pushing back every step of the way. Lila didn't need the luxury of an expensive house or a designer lifestyle to be a good mother. All she needed was her love, her support, and her independence. Janet had countered each of the accusations with clear, logical arguments, but the weight of the Steele family's influence was hard to escape.
Lila could feel the heat rising in her chest, a mix of frustration and sadness threatening to break through her composure. The idea that anyone, could question her ability to be Maya's mother, to protect her, to raise her, felt like an attack on everything she had worked so hard to build. The more the lawyers talked, the more she wanted to scream. Across the room, Damien sat with his arms crossed, his face etched with tension. He wasn't speaking much in court, but Lila could see how conflicted he was. He didn't want to hurt her, she knew that, but his family's pressure was suffocating, and no matter how much he loved her, his father's influence over him was like a shadow that never left. Victor Steele had made his views clear. Lila wasn't the right kind of woman for his son. And Maya? She was a pawn in a game Damien had no choice but to play. Lila's heart ached as she watched Damien. She saw the struggle in his eyes, the guilt and the pain. She knew this was tearing him apart, but in some way it was also clear that his father's expectations were still weighing heavily on him. Damien hadn't completely broken free yet. The day of testimony arrived and Lila was called to the stand. She felt the weight of every eye on her as she walked to the front of the room, the quiet murmurs of the courtroom echoing in her ears. But she held her head high. She wasn't going to let them control her, not now. Lila took the oath and sat down in the witness chair, her heart racing as the room fell silent. The questions began. Questions about her ability to care for Maya, about her financial stability, about her lifestyle. Every answer felt like a piece of herself being dissected, put on trial. But she didn't back down. She spoke with conviction, defending her right to raise her daughter the way she saw fit, with love and care. Then the opposing lawyer, one of Victor's longtime associates, asked the question Lila had been dreading. Miss Donovan, How do you plan to provide a stable future for Maya? Do you believe you can truly offer her the kind of lifestyle that Damien Steele can? The wealth, the resources, the security? Lila's stomach churned, but she didn't hesitate. She looked directly at the lawyer, then at the judge, and answered without faltering. I may not have Damien's wealth, but I have something more important. My love for Maya. I'll fight for her every day.
I don't need a mansion to give her a good life. I'll provide her with the things that matter most: support, compassion, and the kind of independence that will let her grow into the woman she deserves to be. Maya doesn't need the Steele name to be happy. She just needs me." There was a brief pause, and Lila could see that her words had made an impact. She could feel the room shift, a subtle acknowledgement of her strength and determination. But the battle was far from over. As the day wore on, Damien found himself more and more conflicted. He had always been loyal to his family, to the legacy his father had built. But as he sat there, watching Lila speak so passionately, so fiercely about their daughter, something inside him shifted. He had spent so many years being the son Victor Steele had wanted him to be. He had followed the path laid out for him, unquestioning, unwilling to defy his father. But Lila, she had changed everything. Lila wasn't asking for anything from him except his support. She didn't care about his wealth or his name. She only cared about being a mother. And for the first time, Damien realized that he needed to care about that too. His thoughts were interrupted when the courtroom doors opened, and Victor Steele walked in, his presence like a storm cloud hanging over the room. He was here, watching his son struggle, watching Lila defend herself, and Damien knew that this was the moment that would define everything. Victor's cold eyes swept over the room, landing on his son, then on Lila.
He didn't even acknowledge her directly, but his gaze was enough to make Damien feel like a child again, caught between two worlds. But this time, Damien didn't flinch. As the trial reached its dramatic climax, it was Damien's turn to take the stand. His heart was pounding as he stood before the judge, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He had never been more terrified, but he knew this was his moment. He cleared his throat before speaking, his voice steady but filled with raw emotion. "Your Honor, I stand before you today as a father. Maya is my daughter, and I will not let anyone, no one, take her away from me. I've spent my life following my father's orders, living in the shadow of an empire I didn't create. But what I've learned in the last year is that family isn't about wealth. It's about love, commitment, and doing what's right. Lila Donovan may not come from money. She may not have the name or the pedigree, but she has something far more important. She has Maya's best interests at heart. I want to raise my daughter with her. I want to give Maya a family, a real family. Not one defined by power or legacy, but by love and support. I refuse to let my family tear us apart. I refuse to let them define my daughter's future. Maya deserves the best of both of us, and I will fight for her, for both of us, no matter what my family wants." There was a long silence in the courtroom after Damien's words. His declaration had shaken the room, silenced the critics, and exposed the raw truth that had been buried beneath years of family loyalty. The judge leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Damien.
Mr. Steele, you've made your position clear. This court will now deliberate.
The verdict came days later, and when it did, it was a victory for Lila and Damien. The judge ruled that they would share joint custody of Maya. It wasn't the perfect outcome, but it was.
As the court battle came to a close, Lila and Damien stood together outside the courthouse, the weight of the past few weeks finally beginning to lift. Damien's hand found hers, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, there was a sense of peace. "We did it," Lila whispered, her voice filled with relief. Damien smiled, a mixture of pride and love in his eyes. "We did it. And we'll keep fighting for her. Always." Lila nodded, looking up at him with a sense of trust she hadn't felt in a long time. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, she felt like they were truly in this together. And as they walked away from the courthouse, hand in hand, they knew that their journey, together, was just beginning. The cold, polished floors of Steel Industries headquarters echoed with the sound of Damien's footsteps as he made his way to his father's office. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of the impending confrontation pressing down on him like a storm cloud, ready to break. It was inevitable. The final confrontation with Victor Steele. His father had been waiting for this moment, his ultimatum hanging over them both like a dark spectre. Damien had tried to avoid it. He had hoped that with the court ruling in their favor, the pressure would ease, that Victor would relent. But he had been wrong. The manipulation, the control, none of it had ended. And now Damien was being forced to choose between the family he had been born into and the family he had chosen. As he reached the door to his father's office, Damien hesitated. He could hear his father's voice on the other side, the unmistakable authority that had shaped his entire life. He could feel the pull of the legacy, the empire that Victor had built, the weight of expectations that had always defined him. But that wasn't who he was anymore. Not entirely. And today, he was about to prove that. Damien knocked twice, the sound sharp and deliberate. The door opened almost immediately, revealing Victor Steele standing at the polished oak desk, his back to the door as he looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city below, bathed in the soft glow of the afternoon sun, seemed far removed from the emotional battlefield that was about to unfold inside that office. "You're here," Victor said, his voice cool, but with an underlying edge of anticipation. Damien stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a soft click. "I'm here," he replied, his voice steady, though his mind raced with the words he knew he had to say. Victor turned to face him, his cold eyes sizing him up as if Damien were a mere extension of himself, something to be molded, controlled. "I assume you've made your decision by now." Damien swallowed the lump in his throat. He had known this day would come. He had known that his father wouldn't simply let go, that he would never accept Damien's decision to prioritize Lila and Maya over the family empire. But he was ready now. He had already made his decision, even if the words didn't come easily. "I've made my decision," Damien said, his voice firm. Victor's lips curled into a thin smile, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good. I was hoping you'd see reason. You know what this means, don't you? Your choices have consequences, Damien. The Steele legacy is not just a family name. It's everything. And you are its future, I've built this empire with my own 2 hands, and it's your responsibility to carry it forward. You can't afford distractions, especially not from a woman like Lila Donovan. She's not the right kind of woman for you, and you know it. Damien's chest tightened. You don't get to decide that for me anymore, Father. Victor's smile faded, his eyes narrowing. You still don't understand, do you? You think this is about her, about your personal desires. This is about the family, about the future. She's using your wealth, your name, to climb higher in the world, and you're too blinded by emotion to see it. Damien's heart pounded in his chest, the anger rising within him like a fire he could no longer contain. You don't know her, he said through clenched teeth. You don't know anything about her. She's not like the women you're used to. She's not interested in my money or my name. She's just trying to raise our daughter, and I'm going to help her, no matter what you say. Victor's gaze hardened, his voice growing colder. If you choose her, Damien, you choose to walk away from everything I've built, from your inheritance, from the future of steel industries. You'll be nothing more than a man tied to a woman who doesn't belong in this world. Damien's fists clenched at his sides, his entire body trembling with a mix of frustration and resolve. I'm done, Father. Done with the manipulation. Done with the control. I'm not your puppet anymore. And I'm not going to let you use me to maintain your empire. You can keep your wealth, your legacy, your name. I don't want any of it. Victor's eyes flashed with something dark. Disappointment, anger, or perhaps a mix of both. But whatever it was, it didn't matter anymore. Damien had made his choice. And for the first time, he realized that the empire, the legacy, was no longer enough to define him. You're making a mistake, Victor spat, his voice low and venomous. You'll regret this, Damien. You'll see what happens when you turn your back on your own blood, your own future. Damien took a step forward, his voice unwavering. I'm not turning my back on my family. I'm choosing a different future. A future where I make my own decisions. Where I'm not bound by the expectations of a man who's never seen me for who I really am. Victor took a step back, his face hardening into something resembling contempt. Then this is the last time you're no longer my son. Damien's heart clenched at the words, but he didn't flinch. He had expected this. He had always known that his father would never accept his decision, never forgive him for breaking away from the family. But in that moment, Damien felt a sense of freedom he hadn't known he needed. He was no longer a prisoner to his father's will. He was free to live his own life, to build his own future with the woman he loved and the child they had created together. I'm sorry you feel that way, Damien said, his voice quiet but firm. But I'm done trying to please you. I'm choosing Lila. I'm choosing Maya. And I'm going to be the father they need, not the son you want me to be. With those final words, Damien turned and walked out of his father's office, leaving behind the legacy that had shaped his entire life. He didn't look back,
didn't stop to see the disappointment on his father's face. He was done being controlled, done being a part of something that wasn't his choice. Lila was sitting in her apartment, cradling Maya in her arms when Damien called. She could hear the tension in his voice, but there was something else too, something softer, something more vulnerable. When he spoke, his words felt like a promise. "I did it, Lila," he said. "I told him. I told my father I won't choose his empire over our family. I'm not walking away from you. And I'm not walking away from Maya. I'm choosing us." Lila's heart swelled with emotion. She had heard him say those words before. But hearing them now, after everything they had been through, felt different. She could hear the sincerity in his voice, the weight of his decision. And for the first time, she truly believed him. "You really mean that?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "You're really choosing us?" Damien's voice softened, and there was a depth to his words that made Lila's heart ache. "I'm choosing you, Lila."
Always. Tears filled Lila's eyes as she looked down at their daughter, the little girl who had brought them together, the little girl who was now at the center of everything they had fought for. She felt the weight of their journey, of the choices they had made, and of the future they were now building together. "I love you, Damien," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "And I love you for this."
"I love you too," Damien said softly. "And I promise we'll build a life together. A real one. No more shadows. Just us."
The following days were a whirlwind of emotions as Damien settled into his new life, a life free from his father's control. The decision to walk away from the Steele legacy wasn't easy, and there were moments of doubt, moments when the pull of his past threatened to pull him back. But with every step forward, he found strength in his commitment to Lila and Maya. As they spent more time together, talking, laughing, planning for their future, Damien realized that the life he had once thought he wanted, the life of power and wealth, had never truly been his. The life he wanted was here, with Lila and Maya, building something real, something lasting. And with each passing day, the bond between them deepened, as did Damien's understanding of what it meant to be a father, a partner, and a man who had finally found his place in the world. With his father's influence finally behind him, Damien was ready to build a future where love and family came first. Hey there! I hope you've been enjoying Lila and Damien's journey so far. What do you think about the huge steps they've taken to build their future together? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think. Don't forget to give a thumbs up if you're rooting for them as much as we are. Your support means the world. The crisp air of early autumn kissed Lila's face as she walked beside Damien, their hands intertwined. Maya, running ahead, was caught up in the excitement of the day, her laughter echoing in the open expanse of Central Park. The sun was setting, casting a soft, golden hue across the trees, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Lila felt at peace. It had been a long, tumultuous journey to this moment. There had been struggles, too many to count, and moments when it felt like the weight of the world would crush her. But now, as she walked hand in hand with the man she loved and watched her daughter chase after the falling leaves, everything felt right. The past, its heartache, its pain, was behind them, and a new chapter was beginning. A chapter they would write together. Maya stopped and turned around, her little face lit up with joy. "Look, Mummy. Look, Daddy." She crouched down and picked up a handful of bright yellow leaves, holding them up to show off her find. Her excitement was contagious, and Lila couldn't help but smile. Damien knelt beside Maya, his large hand gently ruffling her hair. "Those are beautiful, sweetie," he said with a grin. "You're going to have a whole bouquet by the time we're done." Maya giggled and dashed off again, her small feet kicking up leaves as she ran. Lila stood still for a moment, watching the two of them. Her heart swelled with emotion. How had they gotten here? How had they gone from a chaotic meeting in a hotel room, where neither of them had any idea what the future held, to this peaceful moment? Her, Damien, and Maya. A family. Lila reflected on everything that had led them to this point. The battles, the heartbreak, the moments of doubt. She thought back to that stormy night in Chicago, when she had shared a bed with a stranger, not knowing that her life was about to change forever. She had never imagined that a single, impulsive decision could lead her to this moment. But that night, though it had seemed insignificant at the time, had been the beginning of something much bigger, something she never could have predicted.
From the pain of being doubted, of being judged, to the struggles with Damien's family, to the fears of whether Damien would truly step up for her and Maya, it had all been worth it. Because through it all, Lila had found a love she never thought possible. She glanced at Damien as he stood beside Maya, helping her balance on the stone wall near the pond. His face was lit up with an expression of tenderness, of joy. And for the first time in a long time, Lila saw the man he had become. He was no longer the emotionally distant CEO, bound by family expectations and corporate loyalty. He was a father. He was her partner. And he was someone who, despite every obstacle, had chosen them, chose her. Lila had always believed in love, but she had also believed that love came with a price, that to love you had to fight and sacrifice. But what she had learned in the months that followed their meeting was that while love was hard, it wasn't always about sacrifice. Sometimes it was about choosing one another every single day, choosing trust, choosing family, choosing to heal and grow together. "Lila," Damien said, his voice bringing her back to the present. He was standing beside her now, his hand gently resting on her shoulder as he gazed down at her, with a look that was both tender and intense. "You okay?" Lila smiled up at him, the warmth of his touch grounding her. "Yeah, I'm just thinking." She paused, letting out a quiet breath. "I've come a long way, Damien." He frowned slightly, his brow furrowing in concern. "What do you mean?" Lila glanced back at Maya, who was now crouched beside the pond, trying to catch the ducks that were waddling near the shore. "From the moment we met, I never imagined we'd get here. I never imagined we'd be here, together. A family." Damien's expression softened, and he took her hand, squeezing it gently. "It's been a crazy ride, hasn't it?" His voice held a hint of a smile. "But it's our ride, Lila, and I wouldn't change a thing." Lila smiled and shook her head, the words from earlier swirling in her mind. "It's our ride."
She hadn't expected the journey to be easy, but she had never expected to find someone who would fight for their love the way Damien had. His decision to break away from everything his father had worked for, his family, his wealth, his empire, had been the turning point for them. But even after all of that, it had been the little things that had truly solidified her trust in him. The way he held Maya when she was sick, the way he listened when she needed someone to talk to, and the way he had always stood by her side, no matter what his family had said or done. "I didn't think it was possible," Lila said, her voice soft but full of emotion. "I didn't think love could feel like this. Like home. Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Damien's face softened, his eyes meeting hers with a warmth that made her heart flutter. "You've always been where you were supposed to be. All I've ever wanted was to make sure you knew that you and Maya are my family. I choose you both, every day. And no matter what comes next, I'll always choose you." Lila felt her heart swell in her chest as she looked at him. There was no fear in his words, no hesitation. There was only truth. Truth that he had learned to embrace, even when everything in his life had been pushing him away from that reality. But he was here now, fully present, fully committed to her, to Maya, and to the life they were building together. She let out a breath, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I love you, Damien. I never thought I'd say that again after everything I've been through. But you've shown me that love doesn't always have to be complicated. It just has to be real." Damien reached up and wiped the tear from her cheek, his hand gentle against her skin. "You and Maya are my world, Lila. And I'm never going to stop fighting for us." They stood there for a moment, just taking in the peace that surrounded them. The soft rustle of the leaves in the trees above. The sound of Maya laughing in the distance. For once, everything felt still. The chaos, the battles, the hardships, they were behind them. And though they knew the future would still present challenges, they also knew they had each other. "Mommy, Daddy, come on!" Maya's voice echoed across the park as she sprinted toward them, her arms outstretched like a little bird ready to take flight. Lila laughed, feeling a rush of joy as Maya reached them, throwing herself into her arms. Damien chuckled as he lifted Maya up and twirled her around in the air, her giggles filling the air. The sight of them, so carefree, so full of life and love, was everything Lila had dreamed of and more. As Damien set Maya down, and she ran off to explore again, Lila looked at him, her heart full. "Do you ever wonder how we got here?" she asked, her voice soft but full of wonder. Damien smiled, his eyes meeting hers with a warmth that made her heart flutter. "Every day," he replied. "But the thing is, Lila, I'm not looking back anymore. I'm only looking forward. And as long as we're together, that's all that matters." Lila took his hand, the weight of the past finally lifting off her shoulders. "I'm ready for what's next," she said, her voice full of conviction. "Together." Damien nodded, pulling her close. "Together." As they walked hand in hand, the sound of Maya's laughter ringing in the distance, Lila realized that the journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning.
They had faced the storms, the battles, and the doubts. But now they were walking towards something brighter. Toward a future where love and family came first. And as they moved forward, Lila knew one thing for sure. No matter what lay ahead, they would face it together. Their new beginning had arrived, and this time, nothing would stand in their way.
Make sure to hit that subscribe button. Thanks.